Hello, friends. Welcome to Let's Buy a Bike Season 2, where we buy bikes, we talk about bikes, we work on bikes, and sometimes we ride bikes. I'm your contestant, Dirt. Let's get right into it with a quick recap of Season 1. Season 1 was so much fun that we decided to move it over here. We learned a ton about mountain bikes and rode some good ones, some bad ones, and some ugly ones in the process. In total, we said hello and goodbye to 9 different bikes. Let's light a candle and wipe a tear from our eye as we remember them. Number 1. We began Season 1 with $500 and a dream to buy a mountain bike and jump it over the Statue of Liberty. Other than that, we weren't sure what kind of riding we'd be doing, so we wanted a bike that would be versatile, as comfortable climbing as it was descending. So we bought a 2003 Kona Unit single-speed mountain bike. It's steel, it's got no suspension, and it's rad. Like any troubled romance, we had our ups and downs. We've loved it, we've hated it, we've stripped it down for parts. We've apologized, and it's always taken us back. The Kona Unit has taught us tons about love and bikes. From dropouts to freewheels, bottom brackets to brakes, from dirt jumps to elbow fractures. We still have it and ride it regularly, so it stays off the spreadsheet for now. Number 2. While researching our next bike, we saw videos of people jumping off their roof with it. Forum users complained about its weight, but applauded its indestructibility. It had a Marzocchi coil up front, a Fox Vanilla coil shock in the back, both with 100 millimeters of travel. It also had a Shimano Dior drivetrain, Avid BB5 mechanical disc brakes, the worst brakes ever made, and recognizable names on pretty much every component. It was a 2001 Kona Stinky, and at $150, it was a lot more bike than we could afford retail. What kind of mountain bike will $150 get you? This one! I don't even know if it's legal to call this a mountain bike, as riding it down mountains is outside the bounds of its intended use. You certainly wouldn't want to ride it off your roof. Some deals are better than others, though, and while the Kona Stinky was a lot of bike for not much money, it gave us a crash course in bike repair. It taught us about replacing shifters. We learned how to adjust a rear derailleur and how to not adjust a front derailleur. We also learned that if you leave your pedals in your bike for a really long time, they will become nearly impossible to remove. We learned about cheater pipes and stripped crank arm threads. We learned about taking your bike down to the wrenchman and having them perform the dark rites of thread necromancy. When it was finally trail-worthy, I didn't like it. The bike weighed about 40 pounds, had a significant amount of pedal bob, and was just kinda weird. We drifted apart after someone gave me $250 for it. Number 3. The next bike we bought was a 2016 Giant Revel 2. It retailed for about $360 and wasn't much to write home about. It had a 3x5. It's totally fine. Everything is going fine. It had a 21-speed drivetrain with Shimano Tourney, front and rear, a 7-speed freewheel, and an SR Suntour coil fork that had 63 millimeters of travel. That provided more comic relief than utility. We bought the Revel for $75 from someone who couldn't figure out why the rear tire kept going flat. They didn't mention that, though. They didn't say, hey, we've swapped out the inner tube on this thing like 100 times, and the tire keeps going flat within 5 minutes. No. They just said, probably needs a new inner tube. I don't know, my mom put a couple cans on. So we took it home and we put a new tube in it, test rode it, and had it flat within 5 minutes. We went through this process a few more times before realizing that the flats were systemic and not incidental. A couple of kind folks over at r/MTB suggested that the hole in the rim might have burrs or sharp edges, but after hypothesizing and testing for a while, we learned that it was actually a bad tire. It turns out that a tire that sits too loose on the rim will slip when you use your brakes, causing the inner tube to slip as well. The rim will then slice your valve stem or tear it at the base. When we finally got it out on the trail, it felt like a toy, like baby's first mountain bike. It was fun, and it handled everything we threw at it, but we didn't feel comfortable throwing much at it. We sold it for $150, having learned a lesson about bikes that look like mountain bikes, but are not mountain bikes. Someday we'll think of a name for bikes like that, and that name will be hilarious and clever, and everyone will laugh and laugh. Number 4. Having done a bit of research, we learned that what we wanted was an aggressive hardtail trail bike. At least that's what the cool kids were calling it. We started looking specifically for a 2017 Rally Toggle 3. They cost about $1,300 retail at the time, but thanks to some great marketing and a couple of backflips, Rally sold out of them all. They made some more and they sold out of those too. Then they said, hey, you know what? That bike is really cool. Let's not ever make it again. So they were really hard to find. After a month or two of searching, we got super lucky and we found one nearby for $500. It was a great bike. It had a light aluminum frame with a long wheelbase, low center of gravity, and all those modern geometry buzzwords that we love. It had our first hydraulic brakes, our first Maxxis tires, our first tubeless setup, our first SRAM NX 1x11 drivetrain, and an SR Suntour. Do you have to say the SR? Because I don't ever want to say the SR ever again. It had a Suntour air fork. That fork had 120 millimeters of travel. It had lockout, and it had rebound adjust. It was okay. It was an okay fork. It was a real turning point in season 1. It was our first proper mountain bike. By far the most capable. It was also the lightest bike we had ever owned. It taught us a lot about frame geometry, and comparing the Tokel 1, the Tokel 2, and the Tokel 3 together taught us how different components spec'd on the same frame can radically alter the price of a bike. Other than that, we just had fun riding it because there was nothing wrong with it and we didn't have to fix anything. We put a lot of miles on it, and it even talked us into doing our first Black Diamond runs. But they say if you really love something, you should set it free. So we set it free for $750. Number 5. After that, we wanted to see what 24-inch wheels were all about. So we picked up a stolen Saint for $100. We rode it once. We sold it once. It wasn't for us. Number 6. Next, we bought a 2000 Kona. Probably. Someone put a lot of love and labor into making that bike what it was. Unfortunately, what it was a train wreck. But it had nice tires. The wheels were disc only, but it had V-brakes on the rear. No tabs for disc brakes either. The front brake was broken. Brake cables were trashed. The seat was broken. It had BMX crankset and a BMX bottom bracket. And the gear ratio was weird, and I ended up replacing the brake and the saddle, and the wheels, crank arms, and the bottom bracket, and everything got replaced, and I hated that bike. Hated it. We rode it once, and then it sat there in the garage begging us to end its suffering. Finally sold it for a small loss, but we were happy to be rid of it. We were very upfront with the guy who bought it about all the stuff that was wrong with it. He flashed us a smile full of diamonds and Amazon stocks. "I don't care," he said. And he didn't. Number 7. Next, we bought a 2009 Redline Monocog Flight. Yet another steel single-speed bike with no suspension. The guy we bought it from had put a nice 9-speed drivetrain on it, carbon handlebars, Avid hydraulic brakes, and upgraded the wheels and tires. For $200, it was a steal. Plus, it came with an extra set of wheels and tires. We put a lot of city miles on it, but never took it to the dirt because our knees hurt from too much single speeding. We took all the good stuff off of it and then sold it. At this point, things were actually looking pretty grim. We hadn't been anywhere near a mountain in months, and even if one had come to us, we didn't really have a bike we could ride on it. Sure, we had the Kona Unit, and it had new wheels, and it had new tires, and it had 9 new gears, but it also had 100 good reasons not to ride it down a mountain. Then, one morning while we weren't even trying to buy a bike, we accidentally bought a 2010 Marin Team CXR carbon hardtail with basically really fancy everything. We asked nicely if we could have it for $350. Dude said yes. It was an awesome XC bike and we loved it. For a while there, it seemed like it was going to be the only bike we would ever need. But it only takes a couple bad days to ruin a relationship permanently. And we had a couple of bad days. "You'll always be a disappointment to your family," it told us. "Well, you'll never have 27.5s, we told it back. Some things can't be unsaid. It sold itself shortly after that. Number 9. You know that feeling you get when you step out of an airport in another city? You breathe it all in for a moment and say, "I'm gonna ruin this place." That's how I felt the first time I rode our next bike, a 2016 Intense Tracer. Thing was built like a tank, with 160 mil of travel front and rear, and a paint job that was like caution tape, but more urgent. This bike absolutely steamrolled everything. It continually taunted us to go faster and actually laughed at us if we ever touched the brakes. It was all stock except an added dropper seat post and some okay pedals. It never really enjoyed climbing with the stock 2x10 Shimano drivetrain, but when we swapped that out for a SRAM 1x11, it climbed even worse. But once it got pointed downhill, it was all smiles and violence. The good kind of violence, though, like in the movies, not the bad kind. We rode the heck out of it and didn't even mean to sell it. It just sort of happened. So after everything was said and done, we put in $305 and walked away with $1,410. It was well short of the money we needed to get the bike we wanted, a 2019 Canyon Spectral, but it was a lot of fun. We learned a lot about bikes, and we learned a lot about ourselves. And elbow fractures. So, with that out of the way, let's start season 2, and let's buy a bike. This season, we're going to start fresh, and we're going to spend as little money as possible on our first bike. I'm thinking under $500. So,
Rule number 1.
less than $500.
Rule number 2.
Rule number 2, we're only going to add money to the fund if absolutely necessary, or if a killer deal pops up, or if I want to. We'll cap it at another $500.
Rule number 3.
Rule number 3, the spreadsheet is the ultimate authority in this and all things. But ours doesn't care about small expenses like chains, cables, and the occasional tire, etc., etc. We spend a little every month on that stuff, but that money comes from the Bike Master General, who is immune to our spreadsheets.
Rule 4.
I do what I want.
Rule 5.
I did make a transaction or two during the off-season, but I'm gonna leave them out of it for now and only bring them in if we need to, or if I want to. See Rule 4 for more information. This season, our goal is the same, to buy the bitchinest bike we can and jump it off stuff. We'll still be scouring Craigslist for rare gems and legendary mounts, but we'll also be turning an eye towards new bikes. We'll see what's out there this year and which are the best value propositions. We'd like to explore direct-to-consumer brands such as Canyon, Vitas, and Fazari. We'd like to ride the 2020 Trail Bike of the Year, whichever one that turns out to be. We also want to refresh our gear and buy some equipment we've been avoiding. So that's the goal. Although the real goal is to ride bikes and have fun, because that makes us happy. The realer goal is to be happy. To hunt down our bliss, grab it by the horns, and jump it like 500 feet in the air. Maybe throw a tail whip in there and stick out a foot a little bit and be like, yeah! And everyone will be like, yeah! Yeah! And there can be music and people will be like, oh, pick me, pick me, pick me. And I'll be like, nah. Anyway, new year, new channel, new bikes. We're really looking forward to this season and we're already having a great time. Join us next time when we'll buy our first bike, ride it, maybe even sell it. Plus, we'll answer any questions that come up. In the meantime, we're new, so if you like it and want to see more, or you want to play along at home, spread the word. Thanks for hanging out. Let's do it again soon.